Our next panelist coming up is, of course, the great Howard Waitzkin. Is a long-time social medicine activist, professor, and author, most recently of Social Medicine and the Coming Transformation, with Elena Perez and Matt Anderson. And Howard will be speaking about science as ideology, if I got that right. Howard, please. And Howard gets the Early Riser Award. He is in Korea and has come at an ungodly time to be in solidarity with us. Dr. Waitzkin, what a pleasure to be in your presence.
Well, let me just start by thanking Rob and his colleagues, comrades for wonderful work. I've described this in my blurb as a masterpiece. I wanted to just mention that this takes courage also. Rob and his colleagues have actually criticized the capitalist industrial corporate food industry at length, and this has led to problems of having trouble holding down regular jobs and the need to do day jobs to earn a living. And I hope you don't mind my saying that, Rob. So I admire you deeply for this. The point I'm trying to make is that our work is actually dangerous. This is the title of a talk that I wrote long ago, and unexpectedly I got an award. That if our work challenges those who are in power and on top of the financial hierarchy, we can expect that there'll be a problem and the need to do day jobs. And this leads into some of my own day jobs, which had to do with academic positions that I held, where a large part of the job was actually organizing and teaching about evidence-based medicine to medical students and internal medicine residents and postdocs. So as a result of that experience, I'm going to just say a few really nerdy comments today about evidence-based medicine. Please forgive me, because it's not something that I usually would talk about in a forum like this. But I want to just mention that I and some others were astonished to find that the basic principles of evidence-based medicine were essentially erased early in the pandemic as far as the evaluation of COVID-19 vaccines. And so I want to talk just briefly about a couple of the key measures here. So relative risk reduction shows the difference between those receiving an intervention expressed as a percentage of the event rate among those not receiving an intervention like a vaccination. And this is the formula that's used. Until now, the publications about COVID-19 vaccines actually have not talked about effectiveness only by measuring relative risk reduction. On the other hand, there's also absolute risk reduction, which shows the difference from a population's rate, baseline event rate between those receiving and not receiving an intervention, and the number needed to vaccinate, which is a reciprocal of the ARR, shows the number of people needed to be vaccinated in order to prevent a pertinent event in one person, such as an infection by COVID-19. Now, this particular way of looking at it, even though it was required for peer-reviewed journals and regulatory agencies like the FDA, has basically been erased during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's almost impossible to find a publication about these vaccines that actually looks at risk reduction. That is the reduction of risk on a population basis. Likewise, these are measures of harm, the absolute risk of the intervention, which is calculated by subtracting the rate of adverse events in the group not receiving an intervention from that in the group receiving an intervention, and the number needed to harm, which is the reciprocal of the ARI. And in the past, our risk-benefit analyses compared NNV and NNH to determine what the balance between risks and benefit for vaccines were. And this, again, has been essentially erased during the COVID-19 pandemic. So these scientific principles that we ascribed to previously and that we had to do actually are not available anymore. So we tried to get it together to do an article in which we calculated some of these indicators by working with the data that we could find, either in the articles or in other forums. And this is what we found. Actually, the ARRs for symptomatic infection and hospitalization are much lower, 1% and 0.1% respectively, as compared to the RRRs, which are between 50 and 100%. That's what's used to sell the vaccines. The NNV to prevent one symptomatic infection, one hospitalization, is in the range of 80 to 500 and 500 to 4,000. The effectiveness of the vaccines by AAR and NNV was clearly higher in subgroups with high versus low baseline risks indicated by prevalence. And this is something that's been overlooked in distribution policies about the vaccines. The NNV during the pandemic to prevent one hospitalization in some parts of the world was less than 100, whereas in other parts with different baseline risks, it was more than 10,000. When we tried to look at the measures of harm, these were actually extremely difficult to calculate with available data, and they still are difficult to calculate because the data are still unavailable because they're considered proprietary by the pharmaceutical companies making the vaccines. So the implications of this is that vaccine distribution should target subpopulations with higher baseline risk of disease, rather than focusing only on the goal of vaccinating whole populations. This approach could alleviate some of the economic and practical burdens of trying to make vaccines available for everyone, especially in areas in the global south that have trouble obtaining enough vaccines due to the vaccine apartheid, or vaccine imperialism, as it's called. So the science of vaccine evaluation became consistent with dominant ideologies about the capitalist marketplace. And these contributed to the vast inequalities in access to vaccines, especially in the global north. So just about science as ideology, this actually is a concept that was developed importantly by Herbert Marcuse and then elaborated on by Jürgen Habermas. And this is Habermas talking about Marcuse's. I believe that Marcuse's basic thesis, according to which technology and science today also take on the function of legitimating political power, is the key to analyzing the changed constellation that exists today. So these are some of the ways that ideological distortion has affected science, especially in measurement of the effectiveness of COVID vaccines. And we talk about these and other aspects of COVID in our recent book, Social Medicine and the Coming Transformation. And just to wind up, I want to thank Rob and colleagues, comrades, for organizing this session and for the profoundly important work that you do. So thanks very much.